Hi, everyone. Well, I can see more people are coming in now. We just have a quick poll. We'd like people to fill out at the beginning to get more information about who's here today and what you're interested in learning about. And what sort of issues you might be having or questions you might have with energy efficiency and renewable energy in the Sierras. All right, so I think we can get started. As you can see, this webinar is Rural Energy Solutions Part 2, and this is going to be focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy in the Sierra Nevada and in rural regions in general. And we have 3 speakers that we're really excited can join us today and speak about this topic and their expertise within this topic. And we also had a first part to this webinar series, and that was focused on building energy benchmarking and energy efficiency. And if you're interested in learning more about that, that's on Sierra Business Council's YouTube. So feel free to check that out if you would like to learn about energy benchmarking and energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So the general plan for the day for the webinar is to start out with introductions. I'll introduce the different programs at Sierra Business Council that are putting on this webinar and just give some very brief information about what they do and what services they offer. And then we'll hear from our speakers. First Lou Jacobson, then John Friedrich and Anderson Barkow. And they'll speak about their topics and their work in energy efficiency and renewable energy. And then I'll ask them some questions. And then we'll just open it to general Q&A with you all, and really hoping to have a good discussion about your interest in this work and what you're trying to get done and how they might be able to help, or what information they might be able to offer that is relevant to that. Next slide. So the Sierra Nevada Energy Watch is one of those programs putting on this webinar. We work on energy efficiency and electrification services, and you can see this like gray-green section on the map of California is showing the regions that we serve, and we basically can help install energy efficiency and electrification upgrades in facilities at no cost. And this is because of the CPUC's public purpose program charge that's already on people's bills, PG&E bills specifically. And so we can provide these services and help people become more energy efficient through that program. And this is specifically helping public agencies and small and medium-sized businesses install energy efficiency upgrades in PG&E territory. So if you're interested in that program, let us know. Next slide. Then the other program is Sierra Camp, and this is a regional collaborative. It's the dark green on this map of California, and it spans the whole Sierra Nevada region, and it's focused on climate adaptation and resilience. And this is a member-based collaborative that's designed to create partnerships within the region to tackle these issues. And it's also a member of ARCA, which is a collaboration of climate networks to build climate resilience, and also does a lot of legislative work to try to improve funding and access to sustainability resources in the state. Next slide. So here are our speakers for today. Lou Jacobson is going to speak first. He's a director at Willdan and is going to be talking about some of their energy efficiency projects in the region. And this is to upgrade buildings and make them more efficient. Then John Friedrich will speak. He's a strategist at Momentum, and he's going to be talking about electric vehicles mostly, and the work he does with that in the Sierra Nevada and other regions. And then Anderson Barkow is a co-founder of BoxPower, and he's going to be talking about microgrids and solar panels and their work improving grid reliability and installing microgrids. And so, yeah, I'll pass it over to Lou, and he'll start us off sharing about his work.
All right. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you just great, Lou.
All right. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. So I have about 5 minutes to walk you through this stuff, and I'm going to ask that you hold your questions until after we present, and we'll be more than happy to dive in and really support you and answer the questions. So again, my name's Lou Jacobson. I'm a director here at Willdan. I oversee our PG&E government and K-12 program. So we are in contract with PG&E to deliver low and no cost energy saving services to those who receive either natural gas or electricity through PG&E. Next slide, please. So a little bit about my background. I live on the North Coast in Humboldt County. I grew up in rural Ohio, lived in rural West Virginia all the way till about 2005, then moved up here to rural Humboldt, California. And I've been an advocate in the rural space for as long as I can remember. Was a co-chair of the Rural Hard to Reach Working Group here in California, was a member of the California Energy Efficiency Coordinating Committee, and years ago helped kind of launch the concept of the Rural Regional Energy Network that's going to come online. So although I work for Willdan, and as you'll see on the next slide, I'm really tasked with serving everybody in PG&E's territory. One of the big things we're trying to do is figure out how do we deliver services to rural ratepayers here in California. So you can see our service map here. We serve a big territory, and a lot of it is rural, so it's a really important concept. As you can see as well, our task is to serve local governments, local educational facilities is a fancy way of saying schools, and the federal government. We're closing out a 3-year contract, and we're going to be moving into a 4-year contract. You see, we can do a lot, right? 200 different measures, energy saving measures. We can support you in accessing 0% financing through PG&E's on-bill financing program. Have about $4.5 million over the last 3 years, and that's going to be refunded for the 24-27 contract extension. And when we deal with public sector participants, it's really important to underscore that we have a flexible installation service, which means we're going to work with you or your clients to really figure out how do we deal with public contract code, utility code, ed code to get that installed for you. And we have a number of different pathways that we work with folks on. Next slide, please. Just really want to kind of underscore these 3 different services, right, on how we fund. I think hopefully we can dive into this later in this webinar. We have on-bill financing without an incentive. And this is the quickest way to be able to capitalize a project through our program. Incentive only takes a little bit more time. And then the incentive plus OBF is going to be your slowest pathway. So one of the things we work with folks on is, hey, how quickly do you need that construction project launched? How important is, expediting that process versus achieving and realizing as much, money as possible. Hence number 3 there, the incentive plus BIDE, the OBF. Next slide, please. So I think we'll get into some of the challenges of, serving rural spaces, capital access to resources and all that fun stuff later, because really delivering those services is really associated with some of the barriers, right? But I did want to call out two successes, and in one of those is the town of Paradise. And in this scenario, right, we actually carved this off into two projects. We wanted to do as much as we possibly could for the Building Resiliency Center. And what we realized is that if we did one project with incentives and OBF, we could tackle quite a bit of the scope, right? About 80–90% of it, but we couldn't do all of it because some of the lighting measures were actually ineligible for incentives. However, they were eligible for on-bill financing non-incentive. So we took a interesting approach where we said, look, we want to do everything we can for you, but to get there and to be able to capitalize it, we've got to carve it off into these two different channels. So we worked with the town to figure that out. We were able to, work with them to do the assessment, line everything up, access the financing, access the incentive, and then actually move that project forward. And you can see the project financials down there in that table. Next slide, please. Another opportunity is just heat pump water heaters. And so this is actually a significant opportunity. We have amazing incentives for it. There is a gotcha though, you have to have natural gas. So if you're on propane, unfortunately, you wouldn't be eligible for this service, but this can be truly a turnkey solution where we come out, do the assessment, bring the installers, remove your existing natural gas water heaters and install heat pump water heaters to effectively electrify your domestic hot water system. So it's really a great opportunity. Here you can see we did it for Nevada City at their swimming pool. And so when you think about where, at least the energy efficiency industry is going associated with public purpose program surcharge dollars, electrification is really at the basis. So really heat pump water heaters are kind of the new groovy thing. However, we can do a lot on the electrification side, but I do want to underscore, to be eligible for that support, you really do need the natural gas service from PG&E. So that does impact rural services, and certainly we can talk about that later in this presentation if you have questions on that. Next slide, please. So you have my contact information up there. SBC has it as well. So if we can't answer your questions, or if you have more in-depth questions you'd like to explore after this webinar, by all means, please reach out to me. Feel free to call my cell phone listed up there or send me an email. I'd be happy to talk to you and explore what we can do for you. Thank you.
Nice, awesome. And now John is going to speak about his work with electric vehicles at Momentum.
Right. Hi, everybody. This is John Friedrich. I work at a firm called Momentum, which is a small business consultancy based in Sacramento. However, I'm based in South Lake Tahoe, and we work with a whole variety of cities and councils of private fleets and airports and ports to do things, to decarbonize essentially, and to take advantage of all the state and federal and utility and air district money that's out there to do it. And this, of course, very much applies to the Sierra. And so I hope at the end of the talk, we can, and end the discussion, we can talk about your efforts and kind of support you need to get there. So I'm trying to make this news you can use. Apologize if there's any little background traffic noise. I just attended the Tahoe Summit, so I'm live from Java Hut in Kings Beach. So I've been in the Sierra since 2005, mostly in South Lake Tahoe. Did live for a stint in Mariposa, so I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to bring renewable energy and electrification to the Sierra. I'm proud to say I was one of the first, I think, in South Lake Tahoe to have an EV, a little 505E back about a decade ago. So I think you can do. We were talking about how do you define the Sierra. I was thinking of that obnoxious new song by Jason Aldean. What's it? You can try that in a small town. So we said the title of this is try, electrification and 100% renewables in a small town. You can do it. And I also, by the way, serve on the South Lake Tahoe City Council, where we renewable 24/7 go 2030, always in a friendly competition with places like Truckee and Grass Valley. And we have an intention to electrify all of our transit fleet, including microtransit. So That being said, this little context, we can go ahead to Lula, the next slide. So this is just to say that California is further ahead than any other state in the country, probably most of the world, in regulations driving this change that that all parts of the state, including the Sierra, need to comply with. And that, you know, there's some well-known markers along the way about you know, no new internal combustion engine cars sold in 2035. That applies to trucks, heavy duty trucks, in 2036. Starting in a zero emission bus regulations require that by 2029, transit fleets can only purchase new zero emission, aka hydrogen or electric buses, and have to transition within about a decade afterward for their whole fleet. Same with large Class 8 trucks. We work with a variety of clients in that space. No new Class 8 semi trucks that are will be sold that are internal combustion starting in 2036 in California. There are ports like the Port of San Diego that have goals for 100% zero emission trucks. We're talking big rigs visiting by 2030. And all those larger Class 8 trucks need to be zero emission by 2042. So the change is coming. I think everyone here probably embraces it if you're on this call. And so then the question is, how do we accomplish that? And so let's go to the next slide. So the good news is, in California, there is ample funding available from California Energy Commission, from the Air Resources Board, from the air districts that operate under the Air Resources Board. The utilities have programs that will pay for part or all of electric infrastructure. And of course, the federal government has a raft of funding with the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Jobs Act, and others, tax credits, vouchers. We have the low carbon fuel standard program. So next slide. And these next, I'm not intending to go through all of these. I'll spare you that, but I will say that this is just a sampling of the many funding opportunities that exist. And I look forward to the discussion at the end about, you probably know this, but if you work for entities that might have don't have somebody focused on getting the funding, or it's not a top priority of your school district, or or city, or organization or agency. So sometimes it's a matter of getting approval of the decision makers, or having a person that's writing grants that's focused on this area as opposed to others. But there is a lot of money. You can just kind of go through here. Maybe the next slide. One, I would just I'm not sure if I believe I have on here the HVIP program in California. It's a voucher program administered by CARB, but it's vouchers in the range of well over 100,000 for heavy duty vehicles, and it includes vouchers for school buses. So I'm thinking about the Sierra Nevada. You may not, your town may not have a transit fleet if it's a small town, but it certainly has school buses. And there's a program now, HVIP, and the Energy Commission Energize program, joint program, where you can get 300,000 to 400,000 per bus to transition, paying for most of the bus, and then corresponding funding for infrastructure. So between those, you can fund, you can work with the school district to fund most of their transition to electric buses, go from the school bus to the cool bus. And so that's that's an example of an opportunity that exists right now everywhere, that's relevant everywhere, including this here in Nevada. Here's some additional funding opportunities. These air districts, you think in the Sierra, oftentimes they don't get a lot of applications. They all have funds. They have to provide funds just like the big city air districts, and they often don't use them. No one's knocking on their door. They're very flexible. You can, call down, set up a meeting, and ask them about like their Carl Moyer program and whatnot to take advantage of the funds they have available. The VW Mitigation Trust, remember, they cheated on their emissions. They have a lot of funding as well. So there's a lot of different sources. So let's go on to the next slide. And you go on to the next. So that's just to say, the change is coming, and California is pushing it quickly. there's a lot of funding available. Look forward to hearing about your experience in pursuing it. A couple projects I'm involved with in Momentum together with a team of other organizations. One is a zero emission vehicle transition plan for the County of Nevada. That is working with the Nevada County Transportation Commission to have a transition plan for their 9-bus transit fleet, of which they just recently procured 4 electric buses, and also just their county public works vehicles. We'll also be looking at public opportunity charging, or places where the public can charge that may be co-located with county facilities. So that's an example of a county that is really leaning into this transition. We recently completed a zero emission bus rollout plan that every municipality and agency that has a transit fleet needs to complete. They're supposed to have done them by this summer. A lot of them are just starting, but that's something to keep on your radar as whether you're in government or advocating that needs to happen. And again, the good news is there's so much funding out there to make this transition. It can pay back quickly. That the upfront investment in the electric bus, once you deduct all the grants, you start saving, fuel savings, maintenance savings, low carbon fuel standard credits, and those kind of things. So this is a plan that's just underway. It's not so much a show and tell as much as it is, there's opportunities to do this where you live too. And then the next one, the final slide, is there's participating in this mega region. As you can see, it goes up east on the east side into the Sierra Nevada. And this is evaluating as a blueprint for medium and heavy duty, AKA trucks, charging stations, like electric green truck stops in this mega region, and identifying the best locations, 15 or so for hydrogen refueling and electric truck charging infrastructure, and kind of at the point of evaluating sites. So if you have good ideas somewhere in that mega region for where a good green truck stop should be located, that would be another thing we could talk about and welcome input on. So it's a collaboration with a lot of different people and organizations kind of laying this map out. And this point, this is really happening everywhere, right? Where we're starting to see a lot of funding for charging infrastructure along travel corridors. And again, that includes the Sierra. Last year, the Energy Commission had a funding opportunity for rural EV charging infrastructure. I don't know if anyone saw that, but hopefully they'll do that again. But that'd be another one to keep your eye out for, to build out. In my view, like every town in the Sierra should have downtown a bank of fast charging stations as a way to get people to come hang out and charge their car and spend some money in town. So anyway, with that, I'll stop and look forward to the discussion afterwards.
Great. Now Anderson is going to share about his work at BoxPower.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to join. Excited to share a little bit more about BoxPower, where I'm currently a co-founder and the CFO. Next slide, please. Just a little background. We spun out of a Princeton University research project in 2016 that was really focused on this problem of how do we make microgrids more cost effective, especially for smaller systems. They were too expensive compared to a more simple diesel generator. So we've built a number of software and hardware solutions to do so, and really have a focus on rural areas, which is where we're based. We're based in Grass Valley, kind of in the heart of wildfire and winter snows, as many of you are familiar with. Next slide, please. So yeah, just a little bit more about Grass Valley here. Personal issue for us. This is one of the roads to one of our team members' house this winter, with powers down, with lines down, and then in the summer, the wildfire issue has been well covered, and specifically with lines going through rural areas. And so we're really focused on replacing those rural lines with microgrids, simultaneously reducing that wildfire risk, while also providing a more reliable and sustainable energy source for those customers. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the first step in our process, which is currently we're working with 4 of California's IOUs: Liberty, PG&E, SoCal Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. And for many of them, we will come in and help identify where it might make sense to put a microgrid. So this is an example in Emerald Bay, where we found a single line that was serving a relatively small energy load, 8 miles of line in total, high fire risk, high population risk, and looking at what it would take to upgrade those lines, which are what many of the utilities are doing right now with aging infrastructure and causing fire. That would be about $16 million. We're seeing $2 to $5 million per mile to upgrade lines. So, where we're coming in is saying, hey, we could do a microgrid. And in this instance, it's a little bit bigger system, but we could do a microgrid for $7 million, providing a significant cost savings to that upgrade on the line, while also, again, providing that more reliable and sustainable power with lower fire risk. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just fire through a couple examples here. This is another project we did with Liberty outside Truckee in what is called Sagehen Research Station, replaced 4 miles of line that was going to cost the utility about $3 million to upgrade. Instead, they're saving $2 million over the lifetime with a much more local source of power. Next slide, please. PG&E has followed Liberty's path and are rolling out programmatic level investments with hundreds of sites. This is the first of which is a site outside Yosemite. Similarly, a fire burned down 3 miles of line. It was going to be really expensive to rebuild. Instead, they put in this microgrid, which serves 4 residential customers and a telecom tower. Next slide, please. So that's really focused on our utility segment, where we're replacing those lines, but we're also seeing applications with counties and health organizations. So this is an example of a project we did with the Santa Clara County. They had a need for a 100-bed shelter for the unhoused. It was going to cost 6 to 9 months to bring grid power and hundreds of thousands of dollars for that, even though it's right downtown in Santa Clara. And instead, they put in one of our microgrids that's powering the 100-bed shelter. So interesting use case of, microgrids make sense in many different applications. Next slide, please. And then the last example, this is a clinic in Ukiah. Saw lots and lots of outages that were costing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in damage, whether it was lost revenue or immunizations going bad, or lots of different things that you can think about when power goes out at a clinic being really detrimental and potentially life altering. And so we designed and built the system using some of our software and hardware tools to back up the entire critical facility. So 56% of clinics don't have backup power. And so this backed up all of their critical loads, which include operating tables and refrigeration and those types of things. Next slide, please. So, ultimately our thesis is really about, how can we streamline design, procurement, installation for remote and rural locations. We do this with the containerization that you saw, but we also do this with software design tools that help us more quickly design systems as opposed to doing them manually. And then we can remotely control and operate all of the systems as well, identifying issues remotely and fixing them versus, having to go out to site each time. Next slide. I'm going to skip this slide so that I think I hit on a lot of these points on cost and reliability that increased, and instead just go to, really, when we look at microgrids, we really think it's important to look at it as a programmatic level investment. It involves everything from funding from the IRA and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. It involves having site identification. It involves regulatory support if you're working with a utility. And so these are all areas that we've found important as we've gone through our 6-7 year journey now. And so just wanted to share that, it's really important to think around this in a programmatic and from all of these different lenses, not just how do I get a system in as soon as possible. Next slide. Yeah, and I think that does it for me. Looking forward to your questions, and please reach out to me or anyone else. I'll drop my contact info in the chat. But thanks for the opportunity and looking forward to discussing more. these are, yeah, all my appendix slides. If you have lots more questions on some of the workforce development and or economic questions around these projects.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was really great to hear about. Now I'm just going to ask each of our panelists a few questions, and then we'll open it up to get questions from the audience. So my first question for you all is, what challenges do you face when you're doing this work in the Sierra Nevada as opposed to more urban areas? And yeah, feel free to speak up, whoever wants to take that one first.
I mean, I can start, as we're seeing some, immediate challenges right now with a project with PG&E that because of the incredible winter we had and some of the flooding, one of our roads washed out to one of our sites. And so we have to wait for either the Forest Service or PG&E to repair that road. And that's going to be a long process that will lose our construction window during the summer. And so it's going to push the project a year. So I think, weather is certainly a big factor that we take into account a lot in project planning, and sometimes you just have to adjust and realize that those things happen.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I peeked at the survey responses is kind of what I would expect, and it's my experience that I saw that people said cost is an issue, and people to staff capacity, presumably to overcome those costs, aka fundraising, right, submitting grants. Oftentimes, small local governments don't have dedicated development staff, or small school districts don't have somebody who can go pursue the funding opportunities I showed earlier, even though they exist, and the agencies want to support rural areas and sometimes have dedicated funding programs for them. So I think it's really staff, or just really capacity to take advantage of these and kind of, map out plans for a fleet transition like we're doing in Nevada County. Not every county is making that investment right now. So be fortunate if you're in Nevada County that you have forward thinking folks. So I think, I think that's, and that's my experience at, City of South Lake Tahoe. We have a sustainability coordinator now. That was first time ever. But even for her, it's there's so much out there, and there's so many issues, and there's one person. So to be able to take advantage of the resources that exist, I think can be frustrating, and it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think for our team, right, separating, the services Willdan provides as a company to, our utility programs, we have to operate within the regulatory constraints of a proceeding within the PUC and our contract with PG&E. And so, really, I could boil this down to three big challenges, right? And the first one really is finding local contractors and the local capacity to do the work. And so it would be easy to call, let's say, local electricians for an LED retrofit. What becomes more challenging is finding those what I would call like trade allies who are willing to do it within the constraints of the program. And that becomes a little bit more challenging, which leads into the next one, which is effectively, the economics behind it. So if we can't find local contractors to participate and partner with us, we need to bring in a contractor from out of the area. So that actually then increases the cost, because now we're dealing with travel ladders. They may have to, actually ship the product or truck the product up to an area. So serving harder to reach communities, right, incrementally farther away from urban areas creates effectively increased costs, right? And the last one is just effectively localized product availability. And so part of these programs, we really want to install the most efficient technologies we can find off the shelf, right? Our program at the basis is trying to promote efficiency to the greatest degree possible. So if those products aren't readily off the shelf, right, whether we're dealing with a local contractor or needing to bring in a trade ally or a program implementer from out of the area, we're going to see cost escalation because we need to find that high efficiency product somewhere. And so that might mean going to a more urban area, buying that product and then trucking it to the job site. So when we start talking about the challenges, right, we can really then again boil it down to capacity to do the work, the local product availability, and the economics behind it, right? Because if we can't provide a project that makes economical sense, it becomes incrementally more challenging to actually move that forward with a partner or a participating agency.
Nice, that makes sense. And then I just sort of have like the other side of that question I wanted to ask, which is like, given that there are specific issues doing this work in rural areas and the Sierra Nevada in particular, like what approaches do you use at your organization to address these issues, and what sort of support can you provide that helps like alleviate these challenges?
Yeah, I'll jump in since I just spoke on them. So, to be honest, it's working with local community-based organizations and what I would say mission-aligned organizations. So SBC through SBC's local government partnership, right? The Sierra Nevada Energy Watch. So one of the solutions to address, the economics behind this is to create scale. And so where we can bring, let's say, multiple projects together in a rural community or across a rural area, right, we're going to create an economy of scale that delivers a lower price point to all the agencies that we're serving. Now, that doesn't always work, but it is a strategy. Of course, if we can buy in bulk or encourage our implementing parties to buy in bulk, warehouse the extra product, and then deliver it, right, we're going to see additional savings there. And then, of course, working with our local partners to find those contractors. So none of those are magic bullets, right? It doesn't resolve the barriers, but it does generate drivers to move projects forward. So, as a program, we're always looking for that new idea, really at the local level, right? So what we find in serving the whole territory is what's going to work in the Sierras may not work on the North Coast, right? If we have to go to Burnt Ranch and Trinity County, the solutions that we're going to deliver there are going to be a lot different than the solutions that we may have to bring to the table in Sierra County. And so we're always looking at those localized solutions, particularly for the Sierras, and looking to those of you who live in the Sierras to help inform how we approach that.
And I want to take a contrarian approach to that and say, like, to me, we need to partner as rural areas to develop scale to implement broad programs. So, like, for example, one of the reasons we've been able to have some success is by working with a utility that has a large service territory in rural areas. And so we can have a program where, and I think that's true for a lot of these on-bill financing programs too, is it's a large area where you can replicate a program across that and reduce a lot of those one-time costs and spread it across large programmatic level investments. So I think it's both sides. I agree one solution doesn't fit all, but you need some scale. And I think that's been important for us.
I say a couple of things. One is there are examples to learn from each other on. Like I said, we have South Lake Tahoe often have friendly competition with Truckee and Grass Valley. Neither of these places are that large. And so kind of learning from others. Then I would say building or advocating for coalitions to kind of pool resources, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce, which every county has, and the local government, the school district, the nonprofit, Sierra Business Council, right? To kind of just say, okay, we want to have a shared goal for transportation electrification or 100% renewables or whatever the goal may be, and figure out how you're going to pursue funding opportunities. I know Sierra Business Council does that on behalf of organizations, and that's a good resource. But so just finding ways to support the procurement of resources that exist, knowing that individual entities are often can't quite do it and don't have necessarily the internal motivate, that's maybe not a priority, but finding folks from each of those entities that kind of have that shared goal and combining resources and figuring out how to get them and learning from others is what I would recommend.
Nice. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in already, which is awesome. So I think we can just start answering those and start the Q&A and discussion. the first question that has come in is from Deborah Little, and it's asking, is on-bill financing available across California now?
On-bill each utility has a slightly different on-bill financing program, so your mileage is going to vary depending on what investor-owned utility we're working with. In PG&E's territory, yes, on-bill financing is broadly available.
Great, and then I'm gonna jump in really quick. Looks like there's a hand raised, so I'll ask them to unmute. I know, so we'll see. And is there any question that you wanted to ask any of our panelists? If not, I'll move on. And the next question is actually for Anderson. Do you work with the microgrid incentive program?
As you may know, it's relatively new, the program itself, and we've definitely followed it closely and talked with some of the advocates that help make it a reality. We haven't yet done any projects with it, but would be interested in exploring how that could be a solution for a community if interested. So would love to chat more.
Great, and it looks like we have another question for Lou, and this question is saying there are a few contractors in Western Nevada County, or there are a few in Western Nevada County that are willing to learn about efficiency or electrification, and how would you handle that, and how do you try to reach out to local contractors, and also do you offer to train on the job?
All right. And if it's okay, I'm going to bridge that into Jan's question as well, and start with Jan. So, we're an implementer, right? So our job is to install stuff. There's a whole nother track of programs that are funded through the public purpose program. They're called market support programs, or equity programs. And so for us, right, our job is really to just deliver that service. So where we have a local capacity, we bring in that capacity, right? And that was the comment about bringing in outside contractors. It's a priority to use local contractors for a bunch of reasons, but where that's not readily available, we just bring them in. Same thing with the products. Now, on the other track, market support, market equity, or what Sierra Business Council has done recently in forming a rural regional energy network, certainly there's additional capacity or programmatic ability to address those questions outside of kind of our program path, which is really just delivering total system benefit to the utility grid. And that comes into something called workforce education and training, right? Which I think, is outside of my scope, but I do know that the Rural REN is looking at growing a workforce education and training program across their territory. So it's kind of outside of us. Now, going into Deborah's questions, right? Absolutely. If there's contractors in Western Nevada County that are interested in participating with our program, they can reach out to us, and then we'll onboard them into our program if they're willing to be able to actually, adhere to some of the flow down contract requirements that are required. We can also teach them how to access our incentives without having to wrestle the flow down contract requirements. So anybody can access our incentives, but they may not be able to or desire to actually be onboarded as a program contractor. So we do train to a certain degree, but it's not necessarily training on the installs. It's training on how to be in compliance with our program requirements to be able to work with us to access those incentives.
Looks like we have a question for John as well, which is, have you encountered EV skepticism in colder climate and higher elevation communities? And if so, how do you address those concerns? Are those concerns valid, or has the technology come far enough at this point so that these vehicles can exist in those places and it's not an issue?
Well, I've been driving an EV at 6,300 feet since 2014, so that's one answer. It is true that in my experience, the range is less. The battery capacity is diminished. at colder climates. So you just have to take that into consideration. But you know, most you know, even if you're traveling, let's say for, you know, I mean, most, you know, EVs now have ranges of 250, 300, 400. So, I mean, if you lose 10 or 20% on most trips, especially when you travel down off the mountain, right down to Sacramento or something, you end up with more miles than you started with regenerative braking. So you do have some diminishment, but you know, the great majority of trips are local. You know, and as we start getting into like regional heavy duty transportation, like kind of projects I'm working on, that becomes an issue when you're, you know, it's winter and you're climbing up the mountain and you kind of, you know, you don't have a lot of charging opportunities. That's a trickier situation. But for the average EV user, you know, light duty carb driver, in my experience, it's not that problematic. You just have to plan around a slight diminishment of capacity.
Nice. Let's see. All right, it seems like. Oh, he said he had a follow-up piece of that, which is asking about buses and other medium and heavy duty vehicles specifically, instead of like personal cars.
Yes. Yeah, I would say yes, especially, you know, folks that are invested in, you know, like a bus drivers or bus mechanics. They might be concerned about losing the job in that case, but yeah, I mean, I think there is concern, and I think the key there is just to really look at the data, the range, and to talk to the manufacturer to get the specs on colder climates, or to talk to you know, entities that have transitioned their bus fleet in colder or high elevation climates, or where we have hills and mountains and you kind of having to plan around that. I mean, that's certainly a planning factor when we're in Nevada County. Sort of a loud car coming by. So yeah, so that, you know, it's in that planning exercise for Nevada County, we're having to think about that. So I think it's essentially knowing when you're looking at your duty cycles of where the buses and the fleet vehicles go during the day, having enough capacity to account for a margin of error. Like, you know, you usually want to keep the battery capacity above 20%, and then you figure if cold weather climate, you might want to say, you know, plan for being at 30 or 35%. And then again, talking to others who have already done this, just to say, yes, we thought about that. No, it's not a huge issue, but yes, it is important to think about it.
We have another question that came in for Anderson. And it says, are there options for citizens to cooperatively invest and manage microgrids? For example, by a Firewise community or HOA?
There are. I think it's not something we do a lot of. We generally like to focus on the technology and the design side, than putting together like a community of microgrid off-takers. But it's certainly a really exciting concept, and one I think will grow in the next 5 to 10 years significantly. There's been some legislation around it at the CPUC level that's been a little disappointing in terms of allowing for community microgrids, is what they call them. But we do expect it to be a big thing, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have and be helpful where we can. But unfortunately, I think the hardest part is putting together the legal docs around a community microgrid and how you handle individual metering of each person.
Great. All right. I don't see any more questions coming in right now. But please, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat, or raise your hand, and we can answer them. And in the meantime, I'll just ask the panelists another question, since I have a few.
One other point there is that the microgrid incentive program is really good for those types of initiatives. So if like you have a group looking towards doing a community microgrid, that's a really good program to look into.
Nice. My question was, what are some best practices for organizations working on these projects in the region? And is there anything they should keep in mind that might not be intuitive or might not be, that might not be something that they would have known already?
Well, I'll start. I'll be brave here. So my backdrop before Willdan was in the public sector. That's my first private sector job. And over the years, I realized, as boring as it was, learning and understanding public sector procurement standards was critical, right? And now that's paying dividends in this role, but I encourage everybody kind of in the local government space or government space, even if procurement and purchasing is done by a different department, if you're an internal champion trying to move energy efficiency, generation, storage projects forward, microgrid projects forward, learn public contracting, learn about government code 4217 and how to use it both for sole sourcing, but also in a competitive environment. If the politics, in your community don't really afford you an opportunity to move single source or sole source projects forward. And there are other tools out there. So if your organization has adopted the California Uniform, excuse me, I'm going to get this wrong, California Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act standards, it changes some of the procurement standards that you have to adhere for between informal and formal bidding. So as boring and tedious as that is, understanding procurement will pay dividends on the backside when you're trying to launch some of these projects down the road.
Yeah, I guess I would just come back to find out that are wanting to make these decarbonization investments and transitions across the spaces we've been talking about today. I mean, in South Lake Tahoe, there's a 100% renewable committee. There's a Tahoe Climate Change Action Network, and often showing up and pushing for resolutions to get adopted, and then pushing for it to be implemented, and leading to things like hiring staff to focus on it. So turning to groups like SBC that can have the capacity to help. I think that's really, at the end of the day, that's, it's really getting a team together that can help, push for the change and look for the available funding, and to support often, overstressed and under-resourced agencies and entities, because without that kind of focus and kind of offer of assistance or looking for external resources, just the change doesn't happen, just because again, there's not enough capacity oftentimes, as much, even if there's the will.
Yeah, I think just expanding on Lou's point, like, to me, it extends beyond that and extends to understanding your the regulations from the, if you're working with a utility, what their incentives are to do certain things. Diving into the microgrid incentive program is one example. Understanding what type of community you're in and what investment tax credits you may qualify for. For many rural areas, you can get 40, 50, 60% off a microgrid project, or a solar project, or a lot of different types of projects, just off the bat, because it's many rural areas are considered low income. So again, that's a big piece too, I think.
And maybe I could jump on that, right? So ITC, the investment tax credit, has historically not been available for public agencies unless the firm or contractor providing that service internalizes that value. However, the Inflation Reduction Act is and has changed that. So now historically tax exempt organizations, public sector, local government, can now access the ITC through a direct pay benefit. If you're not familiar with that benefit and you're looking to do, solar, storage, microgrid, really encourage you to start learning about it and talking to your finance team about it.
Nice. Looks like we have another question in the chat from Deborah Little for Anderson. And she's asking, are there microgrid projects planned for Nevada City / Grass Valley?
None in the near term within like city limits. We're working with PG&E on a couple in some of the more remote parts of the county and area, but I think what I'd love to learn from you all is like, we've been talking with, for example, out of Nevada County for 3 years about places we could do a microgrid project, and we just haven't been able to figure out where to make one work. And so we've shifted focus a lot to these utilities where we can get those scale and can make projects make a little bit more sense. And so I think, we're here to learn as much as you on how can we get more projects locally done through, local stakeholders.
Nice. Let's see. Are there any other questions coming in? If not, I can ask one more question because it seems like we have time for one more. My last question will just be, what are you most excited about in your work?
I mean, I think we're at a really amazing inflection point where, if you would have told me 4 years ago that we would be replacing lines in rural areas with locally sited microgrids and that was going to actually be more cost effective than building lines, I would have laughed. That was never an idea. And I think the fact that California utilities are doing that and we're starting to see movement across the West is just an indication to me that people are becoming a lot more forward thinking, are trusting these types of technologies a lot more. And we're in for a really exciting 10, 15, 20 years of action to achieve climate goals and to find better solutions for everybody. So I'm really optimistic.
So Lula, could you just, there was a noise that came in when you asked the question. Could you just repeat the question for me?
Yeah, for sure. It was just, what are you most excited about in your work, and maybe what upcoming projects are you excited about?
Well, I would say that the challenge and the opportunity now, right? We keep seeing the climate impacts escalating everywhere with heat and the surface air and oceans and fires and droughts and floods. And so I would say this is always a predicate to raise our level of ambition and urgency. And we should always take that to everything we're working on and saying, the worse things get, the bolder we have to be. And I think often in rural areas, I think we kind of try to bring this perspective to South Lake Tahoe to say you might not have the biggest amount of emissions, but you can move fast and you can be innovative and you can help set the pace by being nimble and creative and ambitious. So I'm excited about those opportunities to learn from each other and challenge each other to do more of that. And then just in California, we have the strongest regulations pushing this direction and the most funding, at a state level. So it's exciting to be, to kind of experiment and to be on the cutting edge of this decarbonization and electrification movement, and in so doing to show the way for the rest of the country and the world, because this has to happen everywhere if we're gonna leave a stable climate for our kids. So I think it's an exciting time. It's a daunting time, but we guys have to go for it because of that. So
Well, I have two. So in my day-to-day, I'm most excited that the state, the Energy Commission, the utilities, and our regulators of the PUC are really supporting building electrification through fuel substitution measures. It's incredibly exciting. The CEC's Equitable Decarb program is going to be rolling out later this year, early next year. So I think the state is really taking the stance that building electrification is needed. They're putting money out there to support it, and they're doing it with an eye on equity, which is outstanding. So I'm incredibly excited about that. Outside of my day-to-day, I'm incredibly excited to see the value that the Rural Regional Energy Network is going to bring to rural California, the Sierras, the North Coast, and the Valley. That was a long time in the making. I want to give my, congratulations to SBC and your partners within that group to launch that. I know it was a big lift, and again, incredibly excited to see it grow and deliver value to rural Californians.
Nice, great. We will send out the slides after the webinar, send them out to all the participants. So you'll have those. I know we went through them pretty quick. And you also have the contact information for our speakers. So if you have any extra questions, feel free to ask them or ask us at Sierra Business Council. Yep, if there are no more questions, thank you guys all so much for attending. And yep, it was, yep. Thank you.
Thanks. Good job.
Thanks,
Tallulah.
everybody.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.